Hello people, it's your favorite pig here, Ugly Pig. I'm going to talk a little bit about GTO Great Teacher Onizuka. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the various screen adaptions of the GTO universe. Of course, everyone knows the GTO anime, at least if you're a fan, which I'm assuming you are if you're watching this video. But over the years, there's been quite a few adaptions of the GTO universe, and I'm going to take a look at all of the different adaptions. But first, I'm going to just explain relatively quickly what I mean when I say the GTO universe. Now, GTO started out as a manga by author Toru Fujisawa, but that's not where it all started. All the way back in 1990, Fujisawa created a manga called shonen junaigumi. This is where the character of Onizuka first appeared. The story centers around the infamous Onibaku duo, which is Eikichi Onizuka and Ryoji Danma, when they were in high school. Mostly it's about them getting into fights and always winning, and trying to pick up girls and always failing. There's a lot of raunchy comedy and a lot of fighting, and it's all pretty juvenile stuff. At the same time, the series is, well, epic, for lack of a better term, with 31 volumes. There are a lot of characters that come and go throughout the story, many of whom have their own relationships, grudges, allegiances, whatever. It's actually pretty complex. And there are a lot of good stories in it if you can look past all the dick jokes and fighting. And besides, there are dick jokes and fighting. That stuff's fun too. Now, when Tokyopop brought this series over to the US, they retitled it GTO The Early Years, which doesn't really make sense, as Onizuka is not really a teacher at this point. The English version is based on the wideband edition, which means it's 15 volumes and not 31. The first 10 were published by Tokyopop, and the last 5 were published recently by Vertigo. Next, we have Bad Company, a 1-volume prequel to Shonen Junaigumi, in which we get to see Ryoji and Onizuka's first meeting, initial rivalry, and the beginning of their friendship. It also shows their first encounter with Kyosuke Masaki and the Midnight Angels, which, if you're up on your GTO lore, is a very big deal. The 1 volume also contains the Bad Company 2 story, which is set shortly after Bad Company Part 1. It's about Ryoji meeting some woman and stuff happens. It's not as interesting. Next up is the big one, GTO Great Teacher Onizuka, my favorite manga of all time. You probably know the story. Eikichi and Ryoji are all grown up now-ish, and Onizuka becomes a teacher. A very interesting teacher. At 25 volumes, I consider this an absolute masterpiece. I really do. It was published in English by Tokyopop, but the English version is now out of print, as is most of Shonen Junaigumi. Fujisawa took a break from the GTO universe for a while to work on other projects, but he returned to the GTO universe in 2009 with the sequel, or side story, or whatever you want to call it, GTO Shonen 14 Days, or 14 Days in Shonen, which is the English title. It's currently being published in English by Vertigo, and as of right now, they're up to 7 out of a total of 9 volumes. Finally, there are 2 new series, started by Fujisawa last year. One is GTR Great Transporter Ryoji. Then there's Ino Head Gargoyle, which has as its protagonist Sajima, Onizuka's not particularly reliable, corrupt cop friend. These 2 latest series I haven't read yet, since they're not out in English, so I don't really have anything to say about them. With that out of the way, I'm going to take a look at the various TV and movie adaptations of this universe, starting with the Shonen Junaigumi anime. Unlike GTO, Shonen Junaigumi did not get a television anime, which is unfortunate because it really could have used one. I think it goes without saying that 5 OVAs just aren't enough to cover such a long story, but 5 OVAs are exactly what Shonen Junaigumi got. When adapting the story, they based each episode on a more or less standalone story arc. As a result, there's little to no continuity between episodes. Characters appear with no introduction. There are references to events from the manga that didn't make it into the anime. Things like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you haven't actually read the manga. Still, each individual episode more or less works as a coherent narrative. Of course, these are very condensed versions of the stories. A lot of minor points are left out, and while some of the comedy has made it through intact, many of the funnier bits are missing. The worst offender by far is episode 4, which is based on the Midnight Angels arc. In the manga, that's something like 4 volumes, which is not that easy to fit into one 45-minute episode. To its credit, it manages to tell an interesting story, but it's not always as coherent as one might hope. The climax, in particular, is a mess. Since the episodes were first released something like a year apart, they don't really feel like a continuing series. It doesn't help that the first episode was done by a different studio and staff. It has an entirely different style and feel, and even has different music. The remaining episodes were done by JC staff, but even these are very inconsistent quality-wise. Most of them look okay, but episode 3 has terrible animation. 4 and 5, on the other hand, are probably the best-looking ones out of the JC staff-produced episodes. Overall, the Shonen Junaigumi anime, well, it's not great, but it's not bad. It's worth a look if you're a fan. The the live-action version of shonen junaigumi, which, oh yeah, is a thing, follows a similar method of adapting the manga as the anime did. 5 individual episodes released straight to VHS in the mid-90s, and never seeing a release on DVD, nor for that matter any release in English. The anime at least got a fan sub, but for the live action, there is none. Now, a live-action shonen junaigumi, I guess, could easily be really bad. And, well, it's kinda bad, but it's not terrible. Aside from the cheese factor, which admittedly is significant, there's really nothing especially wrong with it. I mean, I can kinda buy these guys as high school era Ekichi and Ryuji. The production value may not be particularly impressive, and the shabby VHS look doesn't do it any favors. But it does manage a blend of light-hearted comedy and more serious plots, or at least it tries. Although the comedy isn't actually that funny. Much like the anime, each episode adapts a specific story arc from the manga, and it's actually pretty faithful to the source, at least in the beginning. Mostly it steers clear of the story arcs that were adapted by the anime, with a few exceptions. The beginning is obviously the same, and the third episode adapts the Midnight Angels arc much in the same way the fourth OVA did. With a longer running time of about 90 minutes per episode, they do spend a little bit more time on it. Still, it doesn't really go much further in depth than the anime. Oh yeah, speaking of the Midnight Angels arc, there are a couple of things I just have to mention. First, if you're familiar with the story, you know that Ryuji's girlfriend Nagisa has a split personality disorder, and sometimes her dangerous alter ego Yasha comes out. Now in this version, every time that happens, they do these really cheesy video effects, and they do it every time, until it gets to the point where it becomes unintentionally hilarious. I mean, come on. Secondly, Masaki appears in this. Now, at first, they keep showing him wearing sunglasses all the time, and I assumed that this is how they intended to avoid showing his face. But then, they show his face! What gives? In the manga, Fujisawa made it a point to always keep his face obscured at least partially, keeping the character shrouded in an air of mystery, visualizing his status as a living legend, and the anime stayed true to this concept as well. Here, he has like eyes and shit. What? Also, I know he's supposed to admire him and look up to him, but doesn't Akutsu seem just a tad too attached to him here? Moving on. Maybe it's just me, but it seems as the series went on, there was something of a shift in tone and the series got a little bit darker. It strayed more from the source. It switched to a completely different theme music, which I have to admit I actually think is kinda cool. There isn't much comedy anymore, aside from those silly scenes with the principal, who by the way is played by the same actor who would go on to play Vice Principal Uchiyamara in the GTO drama. And I swear, after a certain point, every episode ends with someone getting stabbed and then dying in somebody's arms. I don't think all these characters even died in the manga. There are some other changes as well. In this version, Natsu is Ryuji's childhood friend, not Kamata's. Now I understand why they did that, but it feels a little strange to have Ryuji absorb someone else's background. At least it doesn't leave for America at the end though. Overall, the live-action shonen junaigumi is neither particularly bad or particularly good. I've seen each episode one time and I probably won't watch them again unless there's a fan sub or something. If you're curious and wanna see them, well, if you can find them online, why not? But they're not worth paying through the nose for to find the old VHS tapes. Unless, like me, you collect these things just because. Oh yeah, the Bad Company live action. This was done by the same people who did Shonen Junaigumi, and it's the same kind of thing, only with different actors playing Ryuji and Nekichi. And that's kinda pointless. I know they're supposed to be younger in this, but it's not like these guys look the right age anyway. I mean, they're supposed to be like 13 in this. And besides, one of the Shonen Junaigumi episodes had a flashback to this story, with the original actors. Why not keep them around just for continuity? I really dislike Ryuji in this one. Look at that face he's making. That's the only expression he has throughout the entire thing. And I'm sorry, but I just can't accept this guy as Onizuka. The script attempts to combine Bad Company 1 and Bad Company 2 into one continuous story. And I suppose it works okay, but for some reason they didn't include the Masaki part, which is kind of a shame and a bit of a missed opportunity to tie this into the main series. Oh, and guess how it ends? The live-action version of Bad Company could have been good, but, well, it's not. So let's move on to something that is worth watching. As I said before, I consider the GTO manga a masterpiece. While I can't honestly say the same for the anime adaptation, I do nevertheless think it's a great anime in a lot of ways. Again, I'm assuming if you're watching this that you're a GTO fan, so I'm not going to bother to describe the plot. I'm just discussing my own opinions and observations on the adaptations. The anime, it gets the tone absolutely right. It has a great voice cast, that is, in Japanese. The American dub is garbage, but I won't get into that right now or I'd need a whole other video. It retells a lot of the manga story while mostly staying faithful, and the music is actually very nice. No cheaply produced synthesizer only score here. but it's not all great. The animation hasn't aged well, and to be honest, a lot of it wasn't great to begin with. There are times when it looks good, and there are times, especially early on, where it looks kinda sloppy. And you'll see characters go off model here and there. Like, does this really look like the same person as this? Still, I've seen much worse. And the sometimes less than amazing animation doesn't really ruin the show or anything. And of course, the opening sequence is all kinds of awesome. In adapting the manga, they stay true to the original storyline for the most part, as I've said. Having 43 episodes to tell it probably helps. But it's still somewhat condensed, and some parts they leave out completely. For example, the first chapter in which we see how and why Onizuka decides to become a teacher in the first place. And while GTO was never quite as raunchy as its predecessor, it was apparently still a bit much for TV at times, as it is somewhat toned down. It otherwise deviates from the story by including a bunch of filler episodes. To be fair, some of these are pretty good, and on some occasions they take shorter stories from the manga and expand them into full episodes or even several. For instance, the chapter where Fuyutsuki gets bullied by her female students. In the anime, she runs away and Onizuka goes after her along with some of his students. These episodes I actually think are pretty good. The manga side story Great Toroko Oppai is adapted as well, and rewritten to have Onizuka play a significant part in it. One odd change though is that they replaced the character of the school nurse Naoko Moritaka with the character of Nao Kadena from shonen Junaigumi. They even turn her story arc into a couple of GTO episodes, which means it's a story that's been animated twice, since it was also adapted for the 5th and final OVA. They also merged the character of the school principal Xavier into that of vice principal Uchiyamada, and frankly, why not? He was basically a superfluous character anyway, pretty much identical to Uchiyamada, and hey, even in the manga, Fujisawa wrote him out partway through. Now, people always talk about fan service in anime, so I guess I'll address it. Yeah, there are the occasional panty peeks and boob shots, but the truth is, it feels like we see a lot more of Onizuka's dirty ass than we do anything even remotely appealing. My one big complaint about the series is that they end it halfway through the story, right after the Okinawa arc, after which they just make up an ending and that's it. Yes, I know they made the anime while the manga was still ongoing and that they probably caught up to it, but I really wish they'd left the anime open-ended instead. That way they could have picked it up again a little while later and adapted the rest of the story, because it's really a shame that the later story arcs didn't get animated. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. It's not that the ending they made for the anime is bad, in fact I think they're two pretty good episodes, but they're just nowhere near as good as the rest of the actual story or the actual ending. And plus, this premature ending leaves some earlier plot elements unresolved. Like, what the heck happened to Teshigawara, the math teacher who was stalking Fuyutsuki? In the manga he returns later on and it's a whole big great story, but here he just disappears after his initial appearance with no explanation. And of course we miss out on some excellent storylines, like the big payoff to the animosity that's been building up between Urumi and Miyabi, and like the actual Miyabi story, which is entirely different from what they cooked up for the anime finale. A lot better and more satisfying, plus it does not involve a 13-year-old girl screwing her teacher. Yeah, I really wish they had continued the anime, but hey, that must mean I really liked it, right? Well, yeah, I really did. Which is why the GTO television anime is Piggy approved. Despite my complaints, this anime is a lot of fun and I enjoyed it very much. It's not as good as the manga, but hey, it is what made me a GTO fan in the first place. Well, that and the first live action version.